UVA Sports Today. I am your host, Jeff Fife, with AFP editor Chris Graham, with our holiday edition here of the podcast. I see a lot of different podcasters taking the week off, but no, we will persevere. There's actually some exciting news. We're going to be talking this week's podcast. We've got a triple header, so to speak, talking basketball, football, and baseball. So a lot of fun things going on with Virginia sports this week, Chris, and none more eye-opening than Virginia's last basketball game versus Harvard. And I've heard a lot of people say, Harvard, that's great. Congratulations. There's still a lot of UVA naysayers and doubters out there. What we did to Harvard was hard to watch even when you're a Virginia fan. And Harvard is a good, solid basketball team. Tell us about your experience in JPJ and what was that like watching that total demolition of the Crimson?
I probably don't need to tell the diehards listening to a Christmas week podcast about UVA sports that Harvard came into the season top 25 preseason, came in with a 7-1 record, 6-game winning streak, the last 3 years playing in the NCAA tournament. Last year, upsetting Cincinnati in the first round, losing a tight one in what I guess actually the third round of the NCAA tournament to Michigan State, the team we played the next game in the Sweet 16 and lost to. So, and that Virginia was a 10-point favorite at home going into Sunday. So all that, you know, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably knew a lot of that, or it doesn't take much to remind you of that. So yeah, we're sitting there on press row. Now Harvard had an exam break too, and their game with Virginia was their first game back from the exam break. Probably not the best scheduling. Schedule yourself a cupcake, didn't go to Virginia. But that was the game we had. So they hit a field goal around the 16:30 mark of the first half, got through the lane, got a layup. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that was pretty easy, that layup they got there. That was the one field goal.
The one.
The field goal the first half. The entertainment, the halftime act, Quick Change. People who remember from that NBC the America's Got Talent show from a few years ago that does halftime NBA, a lot of college across the country. I noted on the live blog we do during games that Quick Change left the court only having made one less field goal than Harvard did. By that point in the day. 1 for 20 from the field, 8 for 50 for the game. They made 8 field goals for the game. 1 assist for the game, 27 points for the game. And here's the thing that stands out, you know, the day before, this was on Sunday, Virginia wins 76-27, 39-8 lead at halftime, 76-27 final. Day before, Kentucky put up a similar statement in a game against UCLA, another team that, not a top 25 team, but it comes in with an 8-3 record, and their name is UCLA. And leads 41-7 at halftime, wins the game 83-44, which says UCLA scored 37 in the second half. Virginia only gave up, after giving up 8 points in the first half to Harvard, gave up 19 in the second half. So it's not like they let up the effort. They actually won the second half 37-19. So the team did not step off the accelerator. They put their foot on the neck and started rubbing it in there. And so that says a lot about this Virginia team, that they did not lose their focus, their intensity, their attention in a second half, up 31 at the break.
There's a lot to like about this team. I mean, every single week there seems to be some other positive impact sign message that we get from these kids. You go into a really tough environment, back-to-back games at the Stiegel Center, out cold Fieldhouse, and come out with double-digit victories. And then you've got the opportunity to relax, maybe, and people call this the trap game, worry about Harvard. Let me reference back to Kentucky. Did you get any sense from the coaching staff, from the players in the post-game interviews that they were aware of the Kentucky game and that was sort of their response? Oh, everyone wants to talk about Kentucky being the best team in the country? And I still think Virginia is. Was there any of that in the post-game interviews?
There were a couple people who noted that. Mike Tobey was the first. Malcolm Brogdon also mentioned Kentucky. It was obvious that the guys had watched Kentucky's evisceration of UCLA on Saturday, the day before the Harvard game. And you can't just go out and say, okay, look at what Kentucky did. We're going to do better than that. You have to have the cojones to back that up in a sense. But it was definitely something that the players wanted to point out that, hey, they did that. Look at what we can do. And again, comparable opponents, UCLA and Harvard, probably from an RPI standpoint, from a BPI standpoint, those are two very, very similarly constituted teams. And, Virginia giving up 27 points to a Harvard team that could put points on the board. Their leading scorer, Saunders, came in averaging 20.1 points a game. I think he scored 4, none from the field, had 4 from the foul line, and was only like 4 for 8 from the foul line. Came in averaging something like 7 rebounds, 5 assists, had 1 rebound, 1 assist. They keyed on him, but they keyed on everybody. Again, 8 for 50 from the field. It's something to say that Harvard went 7 for 30 from the field, and that was a vast improvement over their first half performance. But definitely, Virginia came out wanting to make a statement, and that was the most surreal thing I think I've ever seen. I don't think I'll ever see another game like that with a good opponent and a team like a Virginia team dominating a very good opponent.
Yeah, I mean, I think back of Gonzaga sitting at the Sean Singletary era, how we beat them by 30-plus, and they were a solid team coming in. We had gone out the season before that and played out on the West Coast, and they put a physical thumping on us. The final score, they beat us, but it wasn't awful. And then they come back in here, and that may have been, up until that Harvard game, the most impressive total control of another team that I'd seen there at JPJ.
But even that game, so we were talking about that on Press Row at halftime. A couple of us were chatting about games like that we'd seen in the past. And the Gonzaga game came up. Virginia led that game 60-24 at halftime. I mean, that just is ridiculous to even say 60-24 at halftime. But people don't remember, because that game was so out of control at halftime, the final score of that game was 108-87. So Gonzaga scored 63 in the second half. There was a lot of garbage time in that one. There was another one that was comparable, and this is the one that I brought up, a game where Virginia played Clemson, the 1992 Virginia team that started 11-0, the last Virginia team that started 11-0, had a 34-3 lead on Clemson with like 3 minutes left in the first half. The halftime score ended up being something like 41-12. That game, the final, was 100-82. So you had 2 games where Virginia had a 30-plus point lead in the first half, and then the garbage time came up, and, the final score was closer. Even though the game was dominated by those Virginia teams, the final score made it look a little less, considerable than it was. This game was 31 at halftime, and Virginia won by 49 and gave up just 27. That's what's remarkable about this, is that even the reserves, and I don't mean the reserves, the third-string reserves, the B.J. Stiths and that group, the freshmen who don't play much, came in around the 8-minute mark. Then the walk-ons came in about the 3.5-minute mark. They outscored Harvard. I mean, everybody came to play that day from 1 to 15.
Yeah, and Harvard's starters were 1 for 32 from the field.
Yeah.
That's just insane. Reading Harvard's student newspaper, so to speak, which is a nice piece, actually, reading some of their materials. They had some interesting perspectives on that thumping, and we're very happy to get out of Charlottesville. I mean, it's hard not, you got beat down, but you can't, Virginia's a very solid team. And it's not like that Harvard's the only team that scored in single digits and a half this season against Virginia. I mean, I looked Monday morning at the national newspapers. I saw a story from SI that was going very similar to the AFP, going, "Ooh, look, Virginia's making a statement here. Start paying attention to these Cavaliers." But everyone was talking about that Kentucky. Hey, Kentucky, that was a great performance against UCLA, but have they done that to 2 teams and a half?
Right.
I mean, against Rutgers, they only scored 8 points in the second half.
That's what you have to think about here. Harvard scored 27. And that is the second least points Virginia's given up in a game this year. 26 to Rutgers in the Barclays Classic back in November. So that stands out. And these are 2 teams. Harvard, a 3 times NCAA tournament team the last 3 years. Rutgers, a Big Ten team. So we're not talking about beating up on Little Sisters of the Poor here. We're talking about beating up on Power 5 teams.
And there are no Little Sisters of the Poor. You can't say it's like beating up on NJIT because they're going out and getting a chunk of Michigan, or Winthrop because they're beating Clemson. The game experience, it was fascinating. I think the crowd responds best, and I'd be curious on your perspective because you're in the building every home game, obviously. It feels like that Justin Anderson can get the crowd rolling the most of any of the Cavaliers. But the second guy that seems to really get the fans enthusiastic is Toby.
Mike Toby.
And when Toby starts strong or does something, it's like everybody's on that Toby train. And when he opened up with 9 points right off the bat, and from inside, outside, the fans just it seemed electric. What did it feel like? And is there this Toby following that we've got another player that can get that home court advantage going?
I haven't thought about the why to that, but as you're talking about that, I was starting to think about the why Toby can be a fan favorite like that. And I think there's a couple things. One, he's a the big guy, and you root for him because he's shown those flashes, and has put it together in a few games, but has not put it together consistently. And I think there's an aspect of, gosh, if he starts playing like that, this team's already pretty darn good. If Mike Toby has, he had 15 points in the first half, didn't need him in the second half, so in fact he ended up with 15 points. But if he has stretches like that against Duke, against Louisville, eventually against Kentucky, if we get that far, and they get that far, and I'm sure that would be either a Final Four or a national championship game. If he plays that way, anywhere close to that level consistently, lights out. So he had the first 9 points of the game. He had 15 in the first half, and he did it in a variety of ways, as you mentioned. At his first basket, he gets the ball in the lane, hits a little hook shot, gets fouled, makes a three-pointer. His next two shots, one, his foot was on the three-point line. Another, he was a step inside the three-point line. I mean, so he was doing he missed one shot in his first shot of the second half. I think it was his only shot of the second half, and it was right on line. So I think there is that aspect though of he's the 7-foot guy that we all hope for, root for, and seeing him do well is going to be good for this Virginia team's success.
Yeah, when we first started talking about these Cavaliers, we mentioned, the only thing, and I've said this on social media, and people think I'm nuts, and I am, for folks that are listening to this podcast, where they know Chris is the talent, and I'm the over-emotional, insane guy. I stated last year in November that Virginia was going to win the national championship last year. I looked at that layout and thought, and that wasn't all hype. I really thought this was, and I really believe that team could have. This year, I think it's 2 national championships back to back.
Raise the stakes there, right?
I'm raising the stakes.
Go big or go home.
Exactly. And now that I think about this group of kids, it's possible. We think about 2 NBA prospects on the team. It's very possible that there's 4. We think Justin has the potential to maybe even be a lottery pick if he continues to blow up. Brogdon looks like he could be like Joe Harris, that late first round, early second round. But Toby and Gill, why not? Why wouldn't they get looks?
I looked at it last week it was after the Cleveland State game, and the people we just happened to be interviewing that night. And I said to Scott German, our AFP contributor, as we were walking away from the media room, that night we got to interview Brogdon and Anderson and Gill among the people we interviewed, and that I just interviewed three first-team All-ACC guys. Now, I think actually the way it's going to work out, one of those guys will get screwed because just the way it is, it's hard to have one team with 3 guys, especially in a league with as much talent as there is in the ACC. But those are first-team All-ACC guys, all 3 of those guys. And honestly, you put Brogdon as the Joe Harris. I think Brogdon is a mid-first-round guy, and he might be a mid-first-round guy this year. He will graduate this year. Remember, he had a medical redshirt year. What would have been his sophomore season he missed because of the broken foot that he had suffered at the end of his first year. So, not that there's any talk about this, any speculation even, talked about out loud in the media room, but Brogdon will graduate this year. It's hard to when you start thinking down the road, what else can he prove? So, he very well could leave early, even though that wouldn't technically be early. But Justin Anderson's clearly a mid-first-round to late-first-round talent. Mike Toby, you can't teach 7 feet. You can't teach a guy who is 7 feet to be able to shoot the ball as well as he does. His one liability is defending the pick and roll. He's a little slow of foot as far as that goes, but he's an elite rebounder and a great shot blocker. So he makes his ability to finish around the rim and that outside touch he has on offense and his passing. He does one thing poorly. He does 5 or 6 things elite level. So he's an NBA player. And Gill, his only issue may be size, but I can see him, with his strength and his ability to play back to the basket at 6'8", 6'9". I think, and that's weird. It's weird to say 6'8" or 6'9" at power forward is now a tweener, but he is a little bit of a tweener as far as that goes. But he's so athletic that I think he can make it work. All those guys, and those are the guys that we can say are NBA guys. I think we have a couple of freshmen who might work their way into that mix too, but we haven't seen enough of them yet. Isaiah Wilkins, perhaps. Shayak, perhaps. B.J. Stiff, perhaps, down the road. So But yeah, those four guys are NBA guys, no question in my mind.
Take me through your process on watching that game, and at what point in time did it occur to you that we could get that single-digit number in comparison to Kentucky? When did you look, and did you even start thinking about it when the game was going on, and was that being discussed at press row? Boy, because for me, I started to get tense. It's a 30-point lead, and I'm getting tense in the last 4 minutes of the first half because I want that single digit so bad. Was that something on your radar screen? Was that something being discussed?
It was on mine, yeah. It was 9-2 at the first TV timeout, 16-3 at the second TV timeout, 24-4 at the third TV timeout. That's under 8 minutes. You're starting to think, it's possible. Now, I'm still thinking, though, okay, this is still Harvard. Let's respect this team. They're going to make some shots. This is a team that they play well. They can put the ball in the basket. So then it gets to be 31-4, and I write that score on the blog. I even send my wife, who's spending the day in Williamsburg with her mom, a text, 31-4, and I can't believe I'm writing that score down. You look at the clock, and it's 5 minutes and something to go in the half. And that's when you start realizing that Harvard is not getting good shots off. I mean, you pay attention, you're in the flow of the game, you're watching flow of the game, all of a sudden you realize they're not getting good shots. It's not like they're missing, just missing shots. They're not getting good shots. And so, yeah, I got a little tense too. They got 8. The few of us in my section of press row, we're starting to do the math, about a minute and a half to go. They only got 1 possession, maybe 2 possessions left here. I don't think they're going to get their 10. And the other part of the question was we were starting to look at, will they shoot less than 10% for the half? And it's funny, when you're 1 for 20, all you got to do is make 1 shot and you're at 10%. So there were a couple things from a historic perspective. And we had already started looking up around the last TV timeout, the under 4 timeout. We had started looking up the records for futility in a half in the shot clock era in terms of number of field goals made in a half. And we saw that it was 1, and you're starting to think, we could be writing a story about a record being set or tied here. So, yeah, there were a few things that we know we'll never see again. You won't see a team make 1 field goal in a half. You won't see a good team score 8 points in a half, 27 in a game, lose by 49, and all those things. But, yeah, there was definitely some attention being paid on press row in the first half there.
Well, and I'm always fascinated by your observations of sort of the game around the game, what's happening in press row, what's happening in the post game pressers and the comments that you're getting. I'll give my bizarre living room observation because I sort of feel like a little Norman Chad every now and then, where I sort of grade the announcers and their background. Last year's viewing pleasure when Digger Phelps and Bob Knight were on the color commentary for the Notre Dame game. And they both, and that Notre Dame was a real ugly game that we were in total control of. So watching, 2 coaches that I have an incredible amount of respect for wax poetic about Virginia basketball. And London Prentice at that time, they were, he's very young. No one really known him and seen him. He had sort of a little coming out party with his assist. We'd known him to be strong, but hearing Bob Knight, I think you even referenced last year that they should take that recruiting tape and send it around to any of the recruits looking at coming in. This year, I don't know who the color commentator was, what poor coach got tucked in there in the first 5-10 minutes. He was talking like if Virginia wants to be compared with the Kentuckys of the world, they're going to have to finish some of these fast breaks. They're going to have to make better decisions. And by the end of that game, he said, "It's the best team I've seen." I've watched Arizona. I have watched Louisville. I have watched Duke. This is the best team I've seen. The secondary observation, which may still be up on ESPN3 replay, because if you go to the replay of the ESPNU, there's a very interesting segment on ESPN3 between Greenberg and Tony Bennett. Uh-huh. So they have Tony come in studio previous to the game, and he's laying out Tony's offense. And they put him on he's got the whiteboard and the video, and Greenberg is asking him questions about his primary offensive set. And it's great television. And at the very end, after Tony's done describing what he does and how he does it, Greenberg says to him, "Well, there's a reason why. That's why you're on the floor and I'm in here." And I was like, it's brilliant commentary. So if anybody can get back on ESPN3 replay, just go to the halftime, because it's worth that segment to see Tony break down the offense and the play, which at first I'm watching going, you're giving away all the company's secrets. You can't do it to that level. He's exactly describing in detail the motion of the offense. But then you think about, well, it's like the old Stockton Malone pick and roll.
Yeah.
It's coming, but you can't stop it.
I've watched him enough over this is the 6th season that Tony's been in Charlottesville. And having read about that offense before he got there, and I studied it actually before he got there, their unique, the Bennett's version, his father, Dick, of course, the longtime coach at Wisconsin Green Bay, Wisconsin, and then in Washington State. And Tony played for him and was a 49.7% three-point shooter for his career. That offense is built to get open shots, whether they're open layups or open threes. And you see Justin Anderson shooting close to 60% from three-point range just because he's open and he can make the shots. They're not forcing up shots at the end of shot clocks and knocking their numbers down. But you don't really have a point guard. Now, London Perrantes plays point guard, and he's titularly the point guard for this team. You have 3 guards. You have 2 posts. You don't really have a center either. You have 3 guards. You have two forwards. The 2 forwards are constantly setting picks. They're constantly setting screens. Either rub screens or actual screens. They're not really running screen and rolls. You don't run the Malone Stockton screen and roll. You don't run the Chris Paul Blake Griffin. You don't run NBA. Dribble off the screen and roll, and then the guy either rolls or pops. But there's lots and lots and lots of screens, and the bigs are constantly setting screens. The perimeter guys are constantly running off screens, and so your job as a defense is to move constantly because there's not pounding the ball on the floor. There were a couple of possessions, one defensive and one offensive in that Harvard game. If you're going to go back and watch that game on ESPN3, I wish I could point them out to you. They were both in the first half. One possession where Virginia literally, from after the ball was inbounded, Harvard had a turnover, Virginia sets the ball up. They pass the ball into Perrantes. Harvard put on a token press in the backcourt. Perrantes dribbles the ball twice, passes the ball up. It gets passed around the perimeter 3 times. Literally, after Perrantes dribbled the ball 2 times in the backcourt, the ball didn't touch the floor. They passed it 5 times, got a layup. That's how you play offense. Then on defense, Harvard runs a similar offensive set as Virginia does. They run a motion offense as well. Not a lot of pick and rolls. And Harvard was constantly screening and then trying to rub off those screens and send a guy towards the basket off of passes. And Virginia was there every time. And so Harvard had 1 assist in the game on 8 made field goals. And it was because Virginia had the bigs in that pack line defense are crunching down. They're hedging on all those screens. And basically making it so their guards couldn't pass the ball on those screens. The guards had to run back out towards the half-court line. They couldn't do anything with the ball. So eventually the shot clock would run down. They'd throw something up towards the rim and miss a shot. That's why they shot 8 for 50 from the field for the game. There were a few instances, though, both defensively and offensively again, where Virginia was textbook. Watch those. If you're a youth basketball coach, watch those plays. Have your kid watch them, break them down for them, and say that's how you play basketball. We forget, too, all the talk about the defense. 1 for 20 from the field first half, 8 for 50 from the field for the game. Virginia shot just a teensy bit under 60% for the game, including 8 minutes with your third string in and your walk-ons in. They shot just under 60% from the game. This was a defensive domination. It was an offensive domination, too.
Yeah, and that's what's starting to get some notice nationally because people that aren't really paying attention just say Virginia's a one-trick pony with their defense and defense travels. But what the computers don't lie. And you and I, before we fired up the podcast mics, we're talking a little bit about some of the computer rankings and the KenPom. And now it looks like, KenPom's got us ranked 2nd. And because overall we're ranked 2nd in the country for defensive efficiency, but it has us 6th, I believe,
6th.
Offensive efficiency.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think people that think Virginia is an offensive powerhouse are just because if we chose to put 100 on you, we could. But that's not the way Tony plays.
4 straight games now with 70 or more points. This team that can't score points, supposedly. And let people keep thinking that. The people who Virginia play against know that they can score points. Look back at that Maryland game. We forget that we beat Maryland, and now Maryland's 11-1 and number 17 in the country, and Maryland didn't have a chance in that game at home in their arena on a national stage that night. Virginia scored 76 in that game, 74 at VCU, a team that runs up and down the court that calls their defensive style havoc that game. 76 against Harvard, a team that, obviously that game was such an outlier kind of game 76 points, 60% from the field. This is a team that can score points when it needs to, and it's going to need to. There are going to be some ACC opponents. Certainly Carolina will be an ACC opponent that likes to move. They'll want to push pace. Virginia can push pace. They've beaten now 4 teams that will love, 4 straight teams that love to play a faster pace. And, surely Tony wants to keep the other team down in the either 50s or 20s, as the case may be. But Virginia can definitely score on the fast break. They can finish when they need to. But their offense, man, they're at their best when they're running that offense for 25, 30 seconds and still get the layup or get the open three. There aren't a lot of wasted shots in that offense. There's a few in a game, but there's not a lot of wasted movement in that offense.
It's majestic to watch, both offensively and defensively. And it's the most bizarre thing watching a fan base get excited by that shot clock coming towards the end, by the 7-footer shooting 7-footer shooting 20-footers, and by defensive stops. I mean, it's a good time to be a Wahoo, and not just in basketball. But we're coming off a week with a national soccer championship, and then the preseason rankings come out in baseball. And here is Virginia Cavaliers ranked 3rd in the preseason in baseball. And it's starting to feel like, short of the football team, you can't start a discussion with any college athletics without having Virginia's name involved in it somewhere, which is an exciting time.
Yeah, because men's lacrosse and women's lacrosse haven't come out with rankings yet, and they'll both be top 10 as well. Baseball, actually, I think the number 3 ranking in baseball could be a little low for this team. You have all 3 of your weekend starters back with now this great experience, having gotten all the way to the last 2 innings of the championship game of the College World Series. Now, Vanderbilt is number 1. In the preseason rankings. TCU number 2. I'm not sure about TCU. They lose Brendan Finnegan, who pitched in the World Series this year after pitching the College World Series. And they also lost their other big starter. But Virginia's right there in the mix. We'll be happy with number 3. The only question mark about this team is obviously you lose Mike Papi, you lose Derek Fisher from the middle of your lineup. But this team last year, with those 2 first-round picks from the middle of your line, and also Nick Howard went in the first round too, 3 first-round picks in last year's MLB draft. You're missing 2. Your number 3 and number 4 hitters essentially from your lineup. Actually, Fisher, after coming back from his wrist injury, actually was a 5 and 6 hitter in your lineup. But preseason was your cleanup guy. But they weren't an offensive team. This was a team that grinded out a lot of wins. They had pedigree in terms of those 2 big bats in the middle of the lineup. But this was a team that punched and judied you to death. It was classic O'Connor baseball. A lot of bunting. You saw that in College World Series. Station to station baseball, actually not even station to station, a lot of, movement on a lot of hit and runs, a lot of stolen bases. But a team that does play, 2014 baseball really well offensively, even with the batting averages being down this year, and everybody's batting average was down on the team this year, including Papi and Fisher. The on-base percentages were still solid. Papi was just south of 500 on-base percentage. Fisher, even though he's hitting in the 250s, was over 400 on-base percentage. This is the team that works counts, works walks, gets on base, and then when they get on base, even Fisher and Papi could steal bases. And so, you're missing those guys this year, but the formula's still there. Even Ryan Zimmerman, when he played at UVA, they play in a pitcher's paradise and a hitter's nightmare kind of a park. 410 to center field with a 40-foot wall. Ryan Zimmerman is the one guy who's hit one over that 40-foot wall in all the years that Davenport has had that structure there. This is a team, though, that hits line drives into gaps. They get singles, they get walks, they steal bases, they bunt, they score enough runs, and then they pitch you to death. And you've got Nathan Kirby, first-team All-American. You've got Brendan Waddell, who was lights out in the postseason, was undefeated in the postseason. You've got Josh Sabors, who maybe didn't have the All-American or All-ACC season like the other 2 guys did, but all he did was win the 2 biggest games of the season for Virginia. He won that super regional game against Maryland as a surprise starter to send Virginia to Omaha, and then he won the game against Ole Miss that sent them to the College World Series Finals. So you've got those 3 back, plus you've got a cast of characters competing for weekday starting jobs, including a guy that we saw in Waynesboro. We are based in Waynesboro, where the Valley League has a great summer league. And Kevin Doherty is a guy you might see pitching on Tuesdays and Wednesdays as a starter this year. He's going to be competing, though, with Alec Bettinger, who had, of all the guys I mentioned, Alec Bettinger, 6-0, 1.23 ERA, staff's best ERA. Didn't even pitch in the postseason. That's how deep that pitching staff is. So Number 3, yeah, they're gonna be a top contender once again for Omaha, and once again a top contender for that national championship.
I'm going to take an odd left turn on the podcast. You mentioned the Waynesboro Generals. It's interesting that now in Charlottesville, a new team has developed in the Valley Baseball League, the Tom Sox, Charlottesville's addition into the Valley Baseball League. We used to be the pipeline for Virginia baseball. You know, we had a lot of kids. I remember that one exciting he's drafted by Seattle, their number 1 kid, Danny Hudson, was in our crowd whistling and cheering and having a good old time when a couple of the Virginia boys were being represented. Is that the end of the Valley Baseball League pipeline to Virginia players? Are they going
to? Yeah. It's possible that it's the end of that pipeline because Waynesboro was proximate for Brian O'Connor and for Carl Kuhn, who actually is the guy who places the players in the summer leagues on that staff. And Waynesboro being 20 miles away was great because guys who had to stay back for summer school could drive over the mountain. That said, there's a reason when you think back as a Valley League fan, we haven't seen the best players. We haven't seen the Papis and Fishers and guys like that. Not because necessarily the Valley League is looked at as a lesser league by Kuhn and by O'Connor. In fact, O'Connor is very involved in this Tom Sox franchise. Joe Kamansky, and I'm sure I'm getting that name wrong. I'm just since we took the left turn here. But Joe Kashansky, who was an All-American pitcher and first baseman and played in the big leagues, is now back running that team, and he's very close to Brian O'Connor as well. It's actually you place players in summer leagues because the area scouts who watch and take notes on players have seen these guys all spring long in their colleges, and so area scouts for major league teams are assigned an area. And if they've been watching them all spring long, you tend, as a college coach, to want to send them somewhere else. You want to send them to Cape Cod. You want to send them to Northwoods. Obviously, the competition is pretty good in Cape Cod. 1/3 of current major league players played in Cape Cod at one point before they got to the big leagues. But that said, too, those are also different scouts who can watch them. So if you're looking to get a prospect looked at by a different set of scouts, and then there has to be cross-checkers and that kind of thing, who can compare notes on these guys, you actually want to send them away. If you're Virginia, the reason you keep a guy back is because either you want to work on his maybe a strength and conditioning program, or you want to keep him back to get some summer school classes in to make his next couple semesters easier. So that said, yeah, the fact that Charlottesville's in the league will make it harder for us in Waynesboro to get some of those Virginia players. But you're only allowed to have 4 players on a summer league team from a college. So there has been, it was 3 or 4 years ago, we actually had 4 Virginia players at one time on the Waynesboro Generals team. But if they want to place more than 4, they may still put a couple over in Waynesboro. But it's likely that, yeah, that might drive for us.
We'll take him. It's been fun. I think Doherty helped us along the way with the Waynesboro Generals.
Doherty had a couple of big playoff wins for us last year, and if he doesn't get a weekend start or a weekday start this year for Virginia, that tells us who watched him dominate the Valley League just how good that pitching staff is. He pitched, I think he won Game 1 of the championship series in our league in the Valley League this year, and we won the championship for the second straight year this year. So we're a pretty good team. For those listening out there who don't obviously pay close attention to Valley League baseball. And Kevin not only pitched that game, pitched 6-7 shutout innings in that game with mono. We didn't know about that till the next day, but he had been feeling under the weather for a couple weeks. Still a stud, still a horse. Went out there and pitched 6 innings, shutout ball, and got us a win. But before he went back home with mono.
Are there kids like Doherty that are coming up that you can look at UVA's roster, whether it be incoming freshmen or players like him that were midweek starters instead of weekend starters, who could make a leap? I know it's very early, and I love talking baseball in December. Who out there that we may be able to take a look or a snapshot on that may have an impact on this year's team?
Well, one, it's not as early as you think. The season starts, real games start February 13th, so we're not that far away. A weekend series down in Greenville, North Carolina against East Carolina. Then the first home game, I think, is February 17th. Which is just really cold to think about, but we'll be out there, I'm sure. These guys played some last year. I've mentioned some pitchers, and it's going to be hard for pitchers to break through with your 3 weekend starters back. But it's possible Connor Jones, even though he's a pitcher, and he's a guy that was a first-round talent coming out of high school that decided to go to Virginia. had a really good first 2/3 of the season last year. Mid-90s fastball. He was used as a setup man a lot. And I think he hit a freshman wall right around the end of April, and he had a rough stretch down the stretch. Had a good outing in the Super Regionals and kind of got some of that back. But Connor is, now that Nick Howard's gone, and Nick Howard went from being a maybe 10th to 15th round pick to being a first-round pick because of a solid junior season. I don't know if I can expect Connor to make a similar leap, but because Howard went from being a weekday starter his first 2 seasons at Virginia. They made him a reliever his 3rd season, and he went from throwing 92, 93 as a starter to throwing 98, 99 as a reliever with a slider that was just unfair. Connor, though, has the kind of stuff that says closer, at least at the college level, and actually probably closer thereafter. Again, mid-90s fastball, a slider that bites. And so Jones might be a guy that you see in a different role. He's a name that's familiar to UVA fans, but you'll see him. I think he's got to be the odds-on favorite to be the closer this year, just based on his stuff. Unless, it could be the Sabors, who also has a mid-90s fastball. And if they decide to move, if Connor and Kuhn decide to move him from Sunday rotation starter to closer and then make Jones the starter, there's a possibility there as well. Or you could actually see both those guys, 1 8th inning, 1 9th inning, and then move Bettinger up. There's a lot of flexibility there. Really, to me, the only 2 positions that are set are Friday night, Nathan Kirby gets the ball. Saturday, Brandon Waddell gets the ball. And then we'll figure out the rest of them from there. A lot of arms out there, though, in that rotation for Virginia, and in the staff for Virginia. John LaPrice is a guy that got a lot of at-bats last year. Plays third base, played some second base. So he's not an unfamiliar name, but he'll be expected to do some more for this team. Hit 7th, 8th, or 9th with an average close to 400, which says a lot about some depth on that team last year. But I think we'll see LaPrice take a bigger role. Matt Theis is a guy that started a lot in the February, March, early April part of the season. He got less at-bats as the season went on. He got a lot of at-bats early as a DH, a left-handed guy with a nice stroke. Doubles hitter, if he can, bulk up a little bit, maybe put some of those out of the park. But I think Theis will be a guy that you'll see. In fact, they are listing him at catcher now too, and so I think we will see more of him this year. Kenny Towns is back, which is good news for Virginia. He was drafted kind of late last year in the 30th round or so, and there was a possibility that he would leave. But Towns is back. Towns has, he's got a big bat, and he'll be a guy that. Again, we're familiar with, but he'll be expected to do a little bit more this year. If you remember the College World Series last year, he had some key at bats, especially in the College World Series Championship Series, and he was a guy that was really stroking it in the last couple weeks of the season, and had some other good games as well. Joe McCarthy, of course. Joe McCarthy's again not a guy that's not known to Virginia, but now he's the guy. Last year you had 3 guys that were really the key of that offense. And McCarthy was probably the 3rd of the 3, along with Fisher and along with Papi. But now it's McCarthy's team, and he's a junior, and he's a 1st or 2nd round pick. And so, Virginia wants him to stay healthy, obviously, and he's a guy that you could expect maybe 8 to 10 home runs from this year, as long as he gets some protection around him. And so, that's what you expect. Daniel Pinero, I kind of want to see some more out of him this year. Started pretty much the whole season as a freshman, 6'6" shortstop. Had some big at-bats, too, though. After struggling for about the first half of the season, his average in the low 240s, he really came on second half of the season with the bat and was an all ACC defensive player. And so, you don't see a lot of 6'6" shortstops who can cover as much territory as he can, both from the perspective of his height, but also he can move for a 6'6" guy. So this will be a fun team. Defensively last year, a lot of attention was put on the pitching. This team does so well, not just because of the pitching, but because of the defense. Top 3 in the country defensively last year, both in terms of fielding percentage, but also the sabermetrics that have come now from the big leagues to college baseball. They cover the field well. They don't give up a lot of unearned runs, and the pitchers can pitch to spots. The pitchers you have, both Kirby and Waddell. Kirby's probably a 1st-round pick. Waddell maybe a top 5-round pick. They can pitch to where Kuhn tells them to pitch to. And it's key to be able. I've sat out actually. I've sat out in the outfield in the Who zone out there for a few games and just looked into the dugout and watched watched the coaching staff pitch by pitch maneuver the outfield and the infield based on what the location they're pitching to. And it's an intricate operation what they do. I mean, it's so the pitching in concert with the great defense, some hitters step up. This is a pretty good team.
So basketball obviously in a good place. Baseball starting out with a lot of early respect. Let's talk about the other major. Well, all those sports are major, but that gets the most time that we spend on this podcast. Football.
Oh, gosh, do we have to?
Yeah, let's just give it a taste. Give it a look. Recruiting. How are we looking so far? I know it's early yet, but what are the early rankings looking at for our recruiting efforts in football?
Pretty average. For all the hype that Mike London gets for being a great recruiter, the Rivals has Virginia right now 37th in the country. 119 Division I program, so that's above average, but for a Power 5, not as good. There's only a little bit of flexibility too, maybe 4 or 5 more offers you can get out there, and the teams slotted right around us right now in Rivals are Wake Forest and Boston College. I don't think a lot of football fans get too excited when they see their favorite team slotted with Boston College and Wake Forest in the recruiting rankings. So. That won't have an impact on this coming year. I mean, obviously, the fact that Quinn Blanding had the season he did as a true freshman is an aberration. Usually, your recruiting doesn't pay off until 2 or 3 years down the road. A lot of guys get redshirted, and so, until they're redshirt sophomores, you don't see a lot out of most guys. But yeah, this does have an impact 2 or 3 years down the road. And also, again, is another question mark out there. If one of your main reasons for keeping Mike London as a coach is he recruits so well, he ain't recruiting that well right now.
Well, the other news in the Commonwealth, our friends over in Blacksburg, Virginia Tech inks Bud Foster to a 5-year extension, so we get to deal with that defense for a little while longer. Here's my bizarre question. Is it possible that Bud Foster is staying in Blacksburg because of their offense, and specific their offense against Virginia? So let me back up a little bit, this bizarre leap. When Virginia Tech are playing that last game of the season, regular season for us, and that we actually have the lead. We've scored on that defense, and where they are going to have to rely, they're going to have to win that game is by their offense. And their offense just goes through our defense like a hot knife through butter and scores. If that doesn't happen, if Virginia's defense holds, if Virginia Tech's offense doesn't move the ball, albeit with a little help from us, and score, there's going to be, not saying Foster would lose his job, but there's going to be some shake-up in Hokie Town. There's going to be some changes. And now those folks that were chewing a little bit on trying to get Bud Foster on their coaching staffs, maybe if there's a little bit less of his buddies around and there's a little bit of shake-up, then he chooses to go elsewhere. So is it possible that because of our ineptitude and losing to Virginia Tech yet again, that we get 5 more years of Foster?
So we have been, let me just sum things up for the last few weeks of podcasts about this Virginia Tech game. We've already declared on this podcast a few weeks ago that Ohio State is in the playoff because Virginia Tech scored with less than 3 minutes ago and won that game, and thus Virginia Tech didn't finish with a losing record, and then Ohio State didn't have a loss to a losing team because Virginia couldn't stop Virginia Tech's offense. And now Bud Foster is either not the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M or the head coach at Pitt, 2 jobs he had been linked to in the last week or so because of that. It's distinctly possible. I mean, I don't think it's too much of a leap to assume that a 5-7 record, there would have already been some heads having rolled. It's hard for me to imagine after the bowl game that Scott Loeffler keeps his job as offensive coordinator at Virginia Tech. I think the only reason you haven't seen him lose his job yet is because they have a bowl game. And so, keep the continuity, keep him there. Let's play the bowl game, go through that motion. And then not long after that, I think you might see that either his contract won't be renewed. I'm not sure what kind of a deal he signs. This is a Virginia sports podcast, not a Virginia Tech sports podcast. I don't know the details there, but either a contract won't be renewed or he'll be let go or he'll be bought out or something like that. But bottom line, Loeffler's tenure has to be coming to an end. As a Virginia fan, I hope it doesn't because, outside of the fact they had a wildly successful game against us in Blacksburg, that offense is just abysmal and has been for a couple of years. So there's change there coming. There's a lot of people still in Hokie Nation who don't like the fact that Frank Beamer seems to have let football pass him by. I think that's ridiculous, but There are certainly people on Tech sidelines who disagree with me on that, and they live and die Virginia Tech football, and they think that. So, given all that, if you're Bud Foster and Texas A&M is dangling the kind of money that Auburn gave to Will Muschamp, he gets paid more than most head coaches. Will Muschamp, and not much less than when he got paid at Florida to be the head coach, at Auburn to be the defensive coordinator. They're talking $1.5 million a year for a DC at Texas A&M. Pitt has a head coaching job open. Paul Chryst left to go to Wisconsin, back to his roots there at Wisconsin. So to me, Bud Foster would be a perfect head coach at a place like Pitt. So Virginia Tech offers him $900,000 to stay for 5 more years, $900,000 a year for 5 more years. I honestly think, though, Bud Foster has an agent who's good at leveraging things. I don't think he has a care in the world about leaving what is the best job in football for him. He doesn't have the responsibility to run the program. He doesn't have the weight on his shoulders to win the games. His defense, no matter what, his defense always does well. His defense always does his job. They always bring that lunch pail out there. They always play good football. And win or lose, the Tech defense isn't the reason for the win or the loss. I mean, for the loss anyway. And so from the perspective of Bud Foster, I don't know that he wants to be the guy after Beamer leaves. I don't think you want to be Bill Guthridge after Dean Smith leaves. You want to so I honestly think that Foster's 55 years old. I wrote a column about this last night. He's 55 years old. This 5-year contract keeps him until he's 60 years old. Beamer's 68. Beamer signed, actually, it's interesting. Somebody pointed this out on a Tech blog I was reading last night. Beamer signed through the end of 2018. Foster signed through the end of 2019. So there's an interesting little juxtaposition here. How often is it that one of your assistant coaches is there longer than your head coach? Maybe he does. Maybe he is the Bill Guthridge. I don't know. I don't know if I want to be that guy.
I wouldn't. No.
But if you're Foster at this stage, you're 55 years old. If Pitt comes and offers you a job, this is pretty much at 55. If you don't take another job now, you're saying I'm retiring at Virginia Tech. Because at 60, who's going to hire a 60-year-old coach to if you're hiring a coach, you're probably hiring a coach to bring a new system in, to rebuild things. Coaches don't often get hired from outside of a family to take over a good situation. Usually you're getting hired to take over a bad situation. A 60-year-old guy is not the guy you want for a bad situation. He's going to be the guy at Virginia Tech that succeeds Frank Beamer. I don't think I want that job, but I think that's what he's signed himself up for. In the meantime, for the next 5 years, what does he get to do? Recruit linebackers and defensive ends and safeties and cornerbacks and call plays on defense, which are a couple of things he's really, really good at.
And pummel Virginia for another 5 years.
Well, yeah, so they've won 11 straight. Yeah, I think 16 straight might very well be possible.
I was really hoping we could get Foster out of the state. I thought West Virginia was going to get him back before the Rich Rod era back in the day. That would have been a great move for Virginia. Not for Virginia Tech.
Just like when you talked earlier in the podcast about Seth Greenberg. One of the better things to happen for Virginia fans, not that Tech was beating us consistently or anything else, but they were very competitive when Greenberg was the coach there. Couple things. Thank God Tech got rid of him, but also thank God he didn't take one of the two Currys.
Yeah.
Because if he had taken one of the two Currys, he'd be there right now with a statue out in front of Castle Coliseum with his head on it. So. Yeah,
and Louisville should be thanking Virginia Tech administration for getting rid of Greenberg too.
And probably also Florida for Dorian Finney-Smith. Montrezl Harrell. You look at what Tech did getting rid of Greenberg to give James Johnson the job and then firing him after 2 years. A lot of Division I programs right now have some talented players playing for them as transfers because of the fact that Virginia Tech made that boneheaded move to get rid of him. So. At least, though, from their perspective, they kept Bud Foster in-house, and good for them, bad for us in that respect.
Well, as always, UVA Sports Today is going to be keeping track of all the joy that's happening in the Commonwealth. AFP, your site for Virginia sports. Chris is racking out the columns. Even though it's a holiday season, there's always something interesting and heavy and involved to make sure you get involved, whether it be on the live blogs during basketball games and baseball coming up in mid-February, whether it be just commenting on some of the columns and stories that are happening on the AFP site. AFP is there for you with all your Virginia sports coverage. Another great week here at the podcast, and you guys have a fantastic and Merry Christmas. Signing out for Chris Graham, AFP editor with AFP, or AFP editor Chris Graham. And this is not my best close, but Christmas is 2 days away. I am your host, Jeff Fife. You guys have a happy holiday season.